On Easter Sunday in 1937, a man returned to a house looking for the woman he loved, but when he didn't find her, 3 people ended up dead.
Robert George Irwin was said to have been born in a tent on an old-fashioned camp meeting ground in Portland, Oregon. But in reality, he was born on August 5, 1907, in Arroyo Seco Park near Pasadena, California. Even his beginning seemed a little uncertain. He was originally named after one of his father's favorite theologians, Francois Fenelon, but later in life he would change his name completely from Fenelon Arroyo Seco Irwin to Robert G. Irwin. This was in honor of his philosophical idol, the agnostic Robert G. Ingersoll. This mortified his mother. His father, Reverend Benjamin Hardin Irwin, was a nationally known figure in the holiness movement. A man who denounced anything he considered sinful, even things as small as Coca-Cola or wearing hair ties. But despite his strict beliefs, his life took a dramatic turn. In 1900, his career came to an end after he became involved in a sex scandal. And just a couple of years later, in 1902, while in Canada, he married Robert's mother, Mary Lee Jordan, without ever divorcing his first wife. And not long after, his father disappeared from his life entirely, leaving Robert before he was even 3 years old. With him gone, the family was left in poverty. At some point, a family court judge decided Robert could learn a special trade and sent him to a state reformatory where he would spend the next 15 months. And it was there that he first learned how to sculpt. Over time, he became fascinated with the work of Lorado Taft, a well-known American sculptor of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It wasn't just admiration, it became closer to an obsession. Eventually, Robert moved in with Taft's family and later went on to work at a waxwork studio in Los Angeles.
As time went on, those around Robert began to notice something unsettling. He was described as brilliant, but erratic, and at times violent, and that instability only seemed to grow. At one point, he attempted to emasculate himself using a razor. A moment that made it clear something was deeply wrong. Not long after, Robert agreed to be committed to a state mental hospital. He would remain there for about a year, but even after his release, things didn't return to normal. He moved into a New York City rooming house owned by a woman named Mary Gideon. Mary had a daughter named Ethel, and over time Robert began to develop feelings for her. But those feelings weren't returned, and from that point on, things only seemed to spiral further. Robert eventually received additional treatment for his mental illness, this time at a Rockland State Hospital in Orangeburg, New York, where he would remain for 2 years. In the summer of 1936, he was released, but the world he returned to had changed. By that time, Ethel had moved on and married a man named Joseph Cudner. When Robert found out, he didn't confront her. Instead, he created something, a sculpture of Ethel with a cobra coiled tightly around her neck.
At one point, Robert enrolled at the Theological School of St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, but that didn't last long. On March 18, 1937, just 10 days before Easter, he was expelled for what was described as instability. Not long after that, he rented a room on 52nd Street in New York City, just a few blocks away from Mary Gideon's rooming house at 316 East 50th Street. Closer than ever before. Around this time, Robert began to spiral even further. He reportedly considered taking his own life by drowning in the East River, but he never followed through. Instead, he made a different decision. He walked to Mary's rooming house.
On Easter Sunday in 1937, Mary's relatives began arriving at her apartment for what was supposed to be a normal Easter dinner. But something wasn't right. Inside the apartment, they made a horrifying discovery: the partially clothed bodies of Mary and her younger daughter Veronica. Both of them were found in Veronica's bedroom. They had been strangled, and Mary had also been stabbed, and they weren't the only victims. In a nearby room, another body was found. A man named Frank Burns, a deaf English waiter, who had been stabbed multiple times.
As investigators began piecing together what happened, a timeline slowly started to form. An upstairs neighbor, a man named Charles Robinson, reported that sometime shortly after 2 a.m., he noticed Mary's apartment door had been left partially open and he quietly closed it. Then around 3 a.m., Veronica returned home after a night out, reportedly intoxicated. Investigators would later believe the killer had already been inside the apartment, waiting. It was also determined that Frank Burns had likely been killed while he was asleep. At first, suspicion didn't immediately fall on Robert. Instead, investigators looked at other possibilities. A driver was questioned, and eventually, attention turned to Mary's ex-husband, Joseph Gideon. By April 5th, the focus shifted. Investigators began looking more closely at Robert. Because at the crime scene, they found something unusual, a small sculpture carved out of bath soap.
By this point, authorities were no longer just investigating. They were searching. A nationwide search for Robert began as his name quickly became the center of the case. But not everyone was convinced. Ethel, the woman he had once cared so deeply for, struggled to believe that Robert was capable of something like this. But as investigators looked deeper into his past, a very different picture began to form. State Inspector John Lyons would later say, "It makes no difference whether he committed 300 murders. So far as the state is concerned, his psychopathic background shows he is insane."
By late June 1937, the search for Robert was still ongoing. But miles away in Cleveland, Ohio, someone was about to recognize him. A pantry maid working at the Statler Hotel noticed something familiar. She had seen his face in a pulp magazine, and the man working at the hotel under the name Bob Murray looked just like him. He had only been working there less than 2 months, blending in unnoticed. Suspicious, she approached him, asking about his name and whether he knew Robert. Not long after that, he was gone. He cleared out his locker and disappeared.
As the search for Robert intensified, his face began appearing on the front pages of newspapers across the entire country. Then, something strange happened. The Chicago Tribune received a phone call from someone claiming to be Robert. The call offered to surrender for a price, but the Tribune dismissed it as a prank. Then, another newspaper received a similar call, the Chicago Herald-Examiner, and this time they took it seriously. An arrangement was made. Robert would be paid $5,000 in exchange for an exclusive story and his surrender, and unbelievably, he agreed. Robert arrived at the newspaper offices and was placed in a room at the Morrison Hotel in Chicago. There, he worked with reporters to arrange the details of a confession, one that the newspaper planned to publish as an exclusive. They even briefly shielded him from police. Eventually, he was flown back to New York City, where he was finally turned over to authorities.
In his published confession, Robert finally explained what happened, and what he revealed was deeply disturbing. He claimed that he had originally intended to kill Ethel because, in his words, she was the dearest object in the world to him, but instead he killed the others. He said he went to Mary's apartment expecting to find Ethel there. When Mary confronted him and asked him to leave, he attacked her first, striking her before strangling her. Later, when Veronica returned home, he turned his attention to her. He terrorized her, and only killed her after she said his name, making it clear that she recognized him. And then, there was Frank. Robert claimed he was afraid to leave behind a witness, but what he didn't realize was that Frank was deaf. Still, he killed him in his bed.
After his confession, Robert was finally taken into custody. He was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder, and prosecutors made their intentions clear. The district attorney announced they would be seeking the death penalty. Despite everything that had come out about his past, investigators and prosecutors ultimately believed that Robert was fully aware of what he was doing, that he understood the nature of his actions, and that he was not insane.
In the end, Robert pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. As part of an agreement, he even requested something unusual, that a pair of trousers he had abandoned in a suitcase at Grand Central Station be returned to him. He was ultimately sentenced to 139 years to life in prison. He was first sent to Sing Sing for a psychological evaluation. And this time, doctors reached a different conclusion. They ruled him very definitely insane. On December 10th, 1938, he was transferred to Dannemora State Hospital, and that's where he would remain for the rest of his life. Robert Irwin died of cancer in 1975 at Mattawan State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Fishkill, New York. And in the end, the man who spent his entire life shaping figures became one himself.
And that was the true crime case of the Mad Sculptor. What do we think of that, chat? What do we think?
I thought it was pretty crazy.
I think this guy had a freaking screw loose.
Also, in the same county that we live in, there is a Laredo Taft Museum.
Where?
In Elmwood.
Oh.
He, I think, lived there for a while. The statue that's in the park in Elmwood is Laredo Taft. If you went to school in Elmwood, you would learn all kinds of stuff about Laredo Taft. There's a museum of Laredo Taft. So when it said Laredo Taft, I went, "Bah!"
Oh, he was born in Elmwood. Oh, and he died in Chicago.
But yeah, he's like a well-known guy in these parts.
So he died in 1936. So he died literally a year before this dude committed the murders. I wonder if his death had anything to do with him spiraling. Mm-hmm. Like, since he was so obsessed with him, and then, like, since his dad left, and he didn't, like, have a father figure, maybe he looked to this Laredo guy as a father figure, and then when he died, he went even more psycho. This guy just had a screw loose. And this was in the 1930s. And also, $5,000 is not a lot today, but back in the 1930s, I want to see how much that would even be. Roughly equivalent to about $110,000 to $130,000. And also, why did you want a random pair of trousers back?
Yeah.
What was the significance behind that?
Because he's insane, I suppose.
Yeah. Because it seems like there was a lot of debate whether he was insane or was not insane. And the justice system...
They seem pretty insane to me.
Yeah. They didn't oh my god. They probably didn't want to rule him as insane.
Oh man.
Oh my god. They probably didn't want to rule him as insane because then they would give him like a lesser sentence. So they wanted to rule him as sane. But then when he did have his psychological evaluations, they ruled him as very definitely insane.
They said, no.
You got this wrong. You're very definitely insane. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this Easter special. There's another one coming literally tomorrow. So if you're watching this on Saturday, get ready for tomorrow because tomorrow is a doozy. And we just want to wish everyone a happy Easter to everyone who celebrates. And let's hope that the Easter Bunny didn't shit in your eggs. Bye!